A 6-year-old black girl asked to be part of a family for Christmas. Her millionaire wife's reaction was shocking. It was Christmas Eve, and Central Park was covered in a light snow that transformed New York into a movie set. Richard Sterling, 45, CEO of Sterling Financial Group, had chosen that isolated bench to escape the Christmas chaos of his Manhattan mansion. In his hands, he held a copy of A Christmas Carol, ironic, considering that his wife Helen was at that very moment yelling at the decorators because the flowers were not perfectly symmetrical for the Christmas party that would cost more than $200,000. Richard took a deep breath, trying to find peace in Dickens' words, when a small trembling voice made him look up from his book. "Sir, I have no family. Can you be my family for Christmas?" Before him stood a black girl of perhaps 6 years old, with unbraided hair and a little pink dress that had once been pretty but was now dirty and torn at the hem. Her small feet were clad in worn sneakers, unsuitable for the December cold. But it was her eyes that pierced Richard's heart, big, intelligent eyes, filled with a desperate hope that should not have existed on a child's face. "What's the matter, little one?" Richard closed the book immediately, his attention completely captured by this unexpected apparition. "My mom said she was going to buy milk and never came back," the girl explained with devastating sincerity, as if she were describing the weather. "That was many suns ago. The lady at the shelter said I need a new family, but everyone only wants white babies." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. As CEO of one of the largest financial companies in the country, he was used to dealing with numbers, statistics, problems that could be solved with money and strategy. But that little child, sitting in the snow as if it were the most natural thing in the world, represented a type of problem he had never faced before, the harsh reality of a system that failed the most vulnerable people. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, putting away his book and bending down to her height. "Isabella. But everyone calls me Bella." "You look like a nice dad," she said, studying his face with the brutal honesty of children. "Are you rich?" "My aunt said that rich families sometimes want children for Christmas, as gifts." The innocence with which she spoke of being a Christmas present made Richard swallow hard. What kind of world was this where a 6-year-old talked about adoption as if it were a seasonal business transaction? "Bella, where do you live now?" Richard asked, already knowing he wouldn't like the answer. "At the 6th Street shelter. But there are a lot of kids and not much food. And some of the older boys are really mean," she replied, shrugging her small shoulders. "I ran away this morning because it's Christmas and I thought maybe someone would want me as a present too." Richard looked around the park, noticing for the first time how cold it was and how inadequately dressed the child was for the weather. She had walked alone through the streets of New York City at the age of 6, looking for a family. The courage and desperation required for such an act left him speechless. "Bella, are you hungry?" he asked, already knowing the answer from the way she looked at the pretzel he had bought earlier. "A little," she lied, clearly starving. Richard broke the pretzel in half and offered it to her, watching as Bella devoured the food with an urgency that revealed days without a proper meal. As she ate, he found himself thinking of Helen, his wife of 15 years, who spent more on a single handbag than many families saw in a year. What would she say if she knew he was there, sharing food with a street kid on Christmas? What would she say if she knew that, at that very moment, Richard Sterling was considering something that would change their lives forever? If you're wondering how a single conversation can completely transform the lives of two people and expose uncomfortable truths about prejudice and privilege, subscribe to the channel, because what happens next will reveal the true character of everyone involved in this Christmas story that is anything but traditional. Richard Sterling spent the next 2 hours sitting on that bench with Bella, listening to stories that fundamentally changed his perception of childhood, abandonment, and the brutal reality of the American welfare system. The girl spoke with frightening maturity about her mother, Keisha, who had struggled with drug addiction for years before finally disappearing. "Mommy cried a lot at night," Bella explained, swinging her little legs as she finished the hot chocolate Richard had bought from a street vendor. "She said I deserved a better family, that she couldn't give me the things girls like me deserved." "Girls like you?" Richard frowned. "Smart girls. Mom always said I was really smart, that I was going to be someone important one day. But first I needed a family that knew how to take care of smart girls." The conversation was interrupted by the insistent ringing of Richard's cell phone. "Helen." He hesitated for a moment before answering, glancing at Bella, who was watching curiously. "Richard, where the hell are you? The caterers are here and you need to approve the final menu. This party costs more than a car and you just disappear." Helen's shrill voice echoed through the phone, making Bella's eyes widen. Helen, I'll be there in an hour. Something important came up. More important than our Christmas party? Richard, we have 150 guests arriving in 6 hours. This is no time for your existential musings. Richard glanced at Bella, who had discreetly moved away when she sensed the tension in the conversation. A 6-year-old showing more social tact than his 45-year-old wife. Helen, I'm leaving. I have something to discuss with you when I get there. What kind of thing? Richard, you're worrying me. You've been acting very strange lately. Strange. Richard almost laughed at the irony. His wife thought it was strange that he wanted to spend time reflecting instead of supervising an ostentatious party. But she would probably find it much stranger to know that he was considering adopting a child he had met a few hours ago. After hanging up, Richard turned to Bella. Bella, how would you feel about seeing my house? And maybe, meeting my wife? Bella's eyes lit up with such pure hope that it made Richard's chest ache. Really? Does your wife want a daughter too? Richard paused, realizing he didn't know the answer to that question. Helen had always been vague about children, claiming they would interfere with her lifestyle, her travel, her freedom. But perhaps when confronted with an actual child in need, she would discover a maternal instinct he had never seen before. Let's find out together, he said, holding out his hand to Bella. The Uber ride to the Sterling mansion was a revelation. Bella pressed her face against the window, marveling at the Christmas decorations in Manhattan, asking intelligent questions about everything she saw. When they passed a Tiffany window, she asked if the diamonds were stars that fell from the sky. When they saw a man dressed as Santa Claus, she whispered, asking Richard if he thought Santa remembered children like her. Children like you? Children who don't have an address for him to deliver presents to. The answer made Richard realize that Helen wasn't the only person who would be tested that night. He himself had never really thought about privilege, about how his wealth isolated him from the realities that people like Bella faced every day. When they arrived at the Sterling mansion, a 5-story property on the Upper East Side worth $12 million, Bella was silent for a long moment. Is this your house? She asked finally. Yes. It's very big for just 2 people. It is, isn't it? Helen greeted them at the door, clearly annoyed and ready for an argument, but she stopped abruptly when she saw Bella. Her expression quickly shifted from confusion to something Richard couldn't immediately identify, but it certainly wasn't the warm maternal instinct he had expected. Richard, Helen said slowly, her eyes fixed on Bella, who is this child? Helen, this is Bella. Bella, this is my wife, Helen. Hello, Bella said politely, making a small curtsy that she had probably learned at school before her life fell apart. Helen didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at Richard with an expression he knew well, the same one she wore when she found something inappropriate at his parties, something that needed to be removed before the guests arrived. Richard, can I talk to you in private? Helen said, her tone artificially sweet but with a coldness that made Bella instinctively take a step back. It was at that moment that Richard realized he had completely underestimated his wife, and that the Christmas Eve he had imagined was about to turn into something very different from what he had expected. Have you completely lost your mind? Helen Sterling exploded in the private office, her voice echoing off the leather-lined walls as Bella waited in the living room, entertained by a book of fairy tales Richard had found on a dusty bookshelf. Helen, she's a child who needs help. It's Christmas, for God's sake. It's Christmas, Richard, not a charity drive. Helen gestured dramatically, her diamond rings catching the light from the chandelier. We have 150 people arriving in 4 hours for the most important party of the social year, and you turn up with an abandoned child, Richard finished, his voice taking on a coldness Helen rarely heard. An abandoned black child, Richard. Do you understand the implications of that? What will our friends think? What will the press do if they find out we brought a street kid into our home? Richard was silent for a long moment, watching the woman he had married 15 years ago. Helen was beautiful, sophisticated, came from the right family with the right connections. But at that moment, looking at her expression of barely concealed disgust, he was seeing his wife with brutal clarity for the first time. Helen, I'm considering adopting her. The silence that followed was deafening. Helen stood completely still, as if Richard's words were so absurd that her brain couldn't process them. You're joking with me, she said finally, her voice a disbelieving whisper. I've never been more serious in my entire life. Richard, Helen moved closer to him, her voice taking on the manipulative tone she used when she wanted something very specific. You're having a midlife crisis. It's understandable. Powerful men sometimes feel the need to save something. But adoption? A child you've known for 3 hours? A black child. What does the color of her skin have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it, Richard. We have a reputation, a social standing. Our friends, our colleagues, our... God, can you imagine the scandal? Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Financial, adopting a black street child? The press will have a field day. Richard looked out the office window, where he could see Bella sitting in the living room, completely absorbed in her book of fairy tales. She had taken off her worn-out shoes and tucked her legs under her body, and for a moment she looked exactly what she was, a normal child doing a normal child thing. What if I don't care what the press says? Then you care more about a stranger than you do about your own wife, Helen retorted, tears of anger glistening in her eyes. Richard, I didn't sign up for this when I married you. I didn't sign up to become the instant mother of a troubled child just because you're having an existential crisis. Troubled? Helen, she's 6 years old. You know what I mean. Kids like that come with baggage. Problems. You don't know anything about her background, her family, what kind of genes she carries. Richard felt something shift inside him, something fundamental and irreversible. What kind of genes? You know exactly what I'm talking about, Richard. Don't make me spell it out. Actually, Helen, I'd very much like you to spell it out. Tell me exactly what you're thinking. Helen hesitated, realizing she had stepped into dangerous territory, but her arrogance prevented her from backing down. Well, statistically, children from that background are more likely to develop behavioral problems, academic problems, problems with the law. It's just reality, Richard. Reality based on what? Based on data, on studies. Richard, don't make me the villain here. I'm being practical. You're being emotional. It was at that moment that Richard realized he had spent 15 years married to a woman he didn't really know. Or maybe he had always known, but had chosen to ignore it because it was convenient, because it fit into his orderly, predictable life. Helen, what if I told you that I'm going ahead with the adoption, with or without your support? Then I would say that you are choosing a stranger over your wife, and that there are consequences for that kind of choice. Richard looked into Helen's eyes and saw something cold and calculating that made him realize that the woman he loved, or thought he loved, might never have really existed. Out in the living room, Bella had fallen asleep on the sofa, the fairy tale book open on her chest. She looked small and vulnerable, but also strangely at peace, as if she had finally found a safe place to rest. Richard made his decision. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profits, investments, or business strategies. He was thinking about doing the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. But he still had no idea that the cost would be much greater than any amount he had ever lost on the stock market. The Sterling Christmas party was in full swing when Helen decided to turn Bella's adoption into a public spectacle. Richard had spent the afternoon in the guest room with Bella, helping her take a hot bath and find suitable clothes. One of his t-shirts tied around her waist served as a makeshift dress. Bella was beaming, asking 1,000 questions about the house, about the books, about what it was like to have a real family. Do you think I can learn to play the piano? She asked, eyeing the Steinway that dominated the music room. I'm sure you can learn anything you want, Richard replied, and for the first time in years he felt truly useful, truly needed. But when the first guests began to arrive, a carefully selected mix of financial elite, influential politicians, and Manhattan socialites, Helen executed her sabotage plan with surgical precision. Dear ones, she announced to a group of about 20 people gathered in the main hall, her voice carrying that false tone of concern that high society women had mastered. I must share something simply shocking that happened today. My husband had a, how can I put it, crisis of social conscience. Richard, who was in the kitchen helping Bella choose desserts, heard his own wife turning his decision to adopt into entertainment for champagne-drunk guests. He literally brought a street child into our home, Helen continued, ignoring the uncomfortable glances of some of the guests. A black girl he found in the park. And now he's talking about adoption, can you believe it? As if it were a whim, like buying a dog. Helen, murmured Patricia Whitmore, wife of a senator, clearly embarrassed by the direction the conversation was taking. No, it's important to discuss this, Helen insisted, her voice taking on a hysterical tone. Because it affects all of us. When people in our position make these impulsive choices, it sends the wrong message to society. It encourages inappropriate behavior. It was at that moment that Bella appeared at the entrance to the hall, wearing Richard's t-shirt as a dress and carrying a small plate of Christmas cookies. She had heard her name being mentioned and, with the natural curiosity of a child, came to investigate. The silence that followed was brutal. 20 of New York's most powerful and privileged people stared at a 6-year-old child as if she were a disturbing apparition. "Hi," Bella said cheerfully, clearly unaware of the tension in the room. "I'm Bella. Mr. Richard said I can eat as many cookies as I want because it's Christmas." Helen looked at the child with an expression of barely concealed horror, as if Bella were a social bomb about to explode at her carefully orchestrated party. "Honey," Helen said with poisonous sweetness, "I think you should go back to where you were." But Bella, with the devastating innocence of children, didn't pick up on the hostility. Instead, she approached Helen with a plate of cookies. "Do you want one? They're really good. At home. I mean, at the shelter, we only had cookies like this at Christmas." The mention of the shelter made several guests shift uncomfortably. Charles Pemberton, a real estate magnate known for his conservative views, decided to break the silence. "Helen is right, he said, addressing the group but clearly speaking for Bella to hear. There are proper ways to do charity. Established institutions, organizations with proper structure. Bringing unstable elements into environments like this can have unpredictable consequences." Bella frowned, not fully understanding the words but perfectly capturing the tone. Richard, who had witnessed the entire scene from the hallway, felt a purer, more intense anger than he had ever experienced before. Unstable elements. Richard entered the hall, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Are you referring to a 6-year-old child as an unstable element?" "Richard," Charles turned, clearly unaware that he had crossed an irreversible line, "it wasn't personal. We were just discussing the practical realities of..." "The practical realities of what, Charles?" "Of being a decent human being." Helen realized that the situation was getting out of hand and tried to intervene. "Richard, maybe we should discuss this in private." "No, Helen. I think we should discuss this right here, in front of all your friends." Richard knelt down beside Bella, placing his hand protectively on her shoulder. "Bella, can you tell me what family means to you?" Bella looked around at the group of hostile adults, then back at Richard. "Family is people who take care of each other. Who make you feel safe. Who don't let you go hungry or cold or alone. And you feel safe here with me?" "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "You're the first person who's made me feel safe since Mom left." Richard stood up, looking directly at Helen. "Helen, you're right about one thing. There are consequences for the choices we make. And I choose this brave, intelligent, loving child over anyone in this room who thinks human worth can be measured by zip code or skin color." "Richard, you're making a mistake that will destroy our life," Helen said, tears of anger streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Our life was already destroyed, Helen. I was just too blind to see it." Richard picked up Bella and headed for the door of the hall. Before leaving, he turned one last time to the group of silent guests. "By the way, you're all uninvited from my house. Forever." The most expensive Christmas party in Sterling history was over before 9 p.m. And Richard Sterling had discovered that some things in life really were priceless. 18 months later, Richard Sterling sat in the bleachers of a Brooklyn public school, watching Bella, now officially Isabella Sterling, play Fur Elise on the piano during the spring recital. Her small fingers flew across the keys with a precision that impressed even the music teacher, who had commented that Bella had an exceptional natural talent. Richard smiled, remembering the question Bella had asked about learning piano that first night. Not only had she learned, she had become the best student in the class, mastering in 18 months what most children took years to achieve. "Daddy, did you see? I didn't miss a single note." Bella ran to him after the performance, her eyes shining with pride and joy. "I saw everything, Princess. You were perfect." Bella's transformation had been extraordinary, but no more extraordinary than Richard's. Leaving Helen had been painful financially. She had walked away with $40 million in the divorce, but it had been liberating in every other way possible. Richard had sold the pretentious mansion on the Upper East Side and bought a smaller house in Brooklyn, close to Bella's school. He had left Sterling Financial Group to found a non-profit organization focused on adoption and assistance for abandoned children. His former colleagues thought he had gone mad. His true friends, the few who remained, knew that he had finally found sanity. "Mr. Sterling?" A voice behind him made him turn around. It was Keisha Williams, a black woman in her mid-30s whom he recognized as the mother of one of Bella's classmates. "Yes. I just wanted to thank you for what you've done for our school. The music program you funded, it's changed my daughter's life. And many other children's lives." Richard smiled. "I didn't do anything any parent wouldn't do for their children." "Exactly," Keisha replied. "That's what makes you special. You see all the children as your own." After the recital, Richard and Bella went for ice cream at the local ice cream shop, a Friday tradition that had replaced the formal, pretentious dinners of his former life. "Daddy," Bella said, methodically licking her chocolate ice cream, "do you miss your old life?" It was a profound question for a 7-year-old, but Bella had always been extraordinarily perceptive about human emotions. "No," Richard replied honestly. "Do you know why?" "Why?" "Because I didn't know I was just existing until you taught me what it really means to live." Bella considered this seriously. "What about Helen? Do you miss her?" Richard paused. Helen had remarried 6 months after the divorce, to an investment banker even wealthier and even colder than Richard had been. They lived in the same bubble of isolated privilege, surrounded by the same empty, prejudiced people. "I feel sorry for her," Richard said finally. "Because she'll never know the joy of loving someone unconditionally." "Like you love me?" "Exactly like I love you." That night, as Richard tucked Bella into bed in the pink room she had decorated with her own drawings and school certificates, she asked a question that made him realize how much they had both grown. "Daddy, do you think my real mom, I mean my biological mom, do you think she knew you were going to find me?" Richard sat on the edge of the bed, carefully considering his answer. "I think sometimes the universe has a way of putting the right people in the right places at the right time. And I think your birth mother loved you enough to know that you deserved more than she could give you at that time. So maybe she didn't abandon me. Maybe she just sent me to you." "Maybe so, princess. Maybe so." 3 hours later, Richard was in his home office, reviewing proposals to expand the adoption program he had created, when he received an unexpected email. It was from Patricia Whitmore, the wife of the senator who had been at the party that fateful night. "Richard," the email read, "I know we haven't spoken since that night. But I wanted you to know that my husband and I have just begun the process of adopting 2 brothers who have been in the system for 3 years. Your courage that night made us question our own priorities. Thank you for showing us what really matters." Richard smiled, realizing that the quiet revolution Bella had started in his life was spreading in ways he could never have predicted. The real lesson of this story isn't about charity or superficial kindness. It's about how true love requires courage, the courage to challenge preconceptions, to abandon the comfort of the status quo, to choose humanity over social convenience. Bella Sterling had lost a biological mother who couldn't care for her, but she had found a father who loved her enough to rebuild his entire life around her. Richard Sterling had lost a superficial wife and a toxic social circle, but he had found purpose, meaning, and a daughter who taught him daily about courage, resilience, and pure joy. In the end, the question Bella had asked on that bench in Central Park, "Can you be my family at Christmas?" had become the answer to a question Richard didn't even know he was asking: how to live a life that is truly worth living. If this story touched your heart and made you rethink what really constitutes wealth and success in life, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that the best things in life can't be bought, only chosen, protected, and loved unconditionally.